The Iran-Contra Affair. Before the Iran-Contra Affair started, Nicaragua was ruled by Somoza, a dictator. After the 1972 earthquake in Nicaragua, foreign aid from other countries went directly into Somoza's pocket. His regime continued until 1979. In 1979, Somoza was overthrown by the Sandinistas, a rebel group. The USA didn't like the Sandinistas and took action to minimize their power and stop the spread of their influence. So why didn't the USA like the Sandinistas? Because they were communists. Remember, the US feared the spread of communism and wanted to stop it at all costs. So the US built up the Contras financially and militarily. The Contras were a militant rebel group that was anti-communist. The US wanted the Contras to overthrow the Sandinistas. But the Boland Amendments of 1982 and 1984 specifically prohibited U.S. support of the Contras. How did Reagan get the money to give to the Contras? The U.S. sold weapons to Iran in exchange for money. And negotiated the release of American hostages by Hezbollah, a terrorist group in Lebanon. By the time the affair was exposed, the U.S. had sold over 1,500 missiles to Iran. So the U.S. sold weapons to Iran, which helped the U.S. fund the Contras. So what exactly are the Contras? Contras, which became active in 1979, were various militant rebel groups that were anti-communist. They united to form the Nicaraguan resistance and had a common goal to overthrow the Sandinistas. The Contras used terrorist tactics and carried out over 1,300 terrorist attacks on Nicaragua. When the Americans began their covert support of the Contras, there were fewer than 2,000 anti-Sandinista fighters. By the end of 1983, however, there were up to 6,000 Contra fighters. The Iran-Contra Affair was exposed on November 3, 1986 by the Lebanese newspaper Al-Shira. Al-Shira published a series of articles that detailed the weapons for hostages deal. Reagan initially denied that any such deal had taken place. However, he retracted 3 days later and said that the United States had sold weapons to Iran, but emphasized that it had not been a weapons for hostages deal. On the 26th, Reagan and Attorney General Edwin Meese finally held a press conference in which they publicized the details of the Iran-Contra Affair. And Reagan appointed the Tower Commission to investigate the persons involved. The Tower Commission published its findings in February 1987, concluding that Reagan had known about the Iranian trades but not the Contras. In trial, it was discovered that National Security Advisor John Poindexter personally authorized the diversion of money to the Contras, and Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North was found to be the main negotiator of the deals with Iran. On Christmas Eve of 1992, George H.W. Bush, who had been Reagan's vice president during the Iran-Contra Affair, issued pardons for all those involved in the Iran-Contra Affair, bringing the scandal to a close.
Okay, so why don't we start with some background information about you and where you were during the Iran-Contra Affair.
I was a teenager, maybe around 15. My mom, dad, and all of my siblings were around during the war. I was living in Managua, Nicaragua at the time.
What was the general reaction when the Iran-Contra Affair was exposed? What about your family and your own reactions?
Surprised, maybe? I didn't know Iran was backing them up. My family and I were also surprised. I was already in the United States when it was exposed.
How did life change for you when the Sandinistas took over? And what about after the affair?
It changed completely because we had a different type of government, and they had all of these communist lifestyles that were put into place. We had to change our lifestyle completely because we didn't have the freedom anymore to buy what we wanted to. Everything depended on how many people were in your family, which determined how much food you would get. After the affair, I was already in the U.S., so I wasn't affected that much.
What did you think of President Reagan, and what do you think of him now?
I hated him at the time because he was funding a war that was killing people in my country. I was a teenager, so I was more radical. I personally hated him, but I don't think it was the same for my parents. I think they liked that he was fighting the communism in our country. I don't think anything of him now.
How did you know Reagan was supporting the Contras? Was it general knowledge that Reagan was helping the Contras during 1985 to 1986?
Yes, in Nicaragua it was. They used to say it on the news that the American government was against the Sandinistas and that they were the enemy. That's what they used to teach us. Okay.
What kind of role did the U.S. play in Nicaragua? How large was their influence in daily life?
Well, they financed the Contras for one. They wanted to get rid of the communism. They financed the Contra War. Contra means against. It was scary and sad because in the mountains they had Contras that were killing young kids that were forced to be in the military by the Sandinistas, and they were being killed on a daily basis by the Contras. It didn't happen in the cities. They would send the young students to fight the Contras because it was required to be part of the military service by the time you were 16.
What was the general opinion in Nicaragua about the U.S.? What did you think of the U.S.?
That they were imperialistic. Los gringos son imperialistas. The Sandinistas saw Americans as the enemy of humanity, and they even said it in their anthem. We had to sing that song every morning in high school. For us, the Americans were considered evil, and that's not good. I also thought they were the enemy.
Did this opinion/your opinion change after the Contra Affair?
I don't know, because I was already here in the U.S. It was hard for me because I had these opinions before, and all of a sudden I had to come to this country which I thought was the enemy.
What did you think of the government of Nicaragua? What about during the dictatorship?
It was a communist government, and I didn't like it. During the dictatorship, I was too young to understand politics.
What is your opinion of the Sandinistas, the Contras?
At the beginning, the Sandinistas seemed like a good idea, but then when they were headed towards communism, I didn't like that. At the time, I thought the Contras were just evil because they were being financed by the U.S. government, and they were hurting my people.
How are they hurting your people?
They were creating another war, and we had just gotten out of one.
What did you think about the ideas that the Sandinistas wanted to implement in Nicaragua, for example, communism?
At the time, I thought they were good ideas, but then I realized that they were just socialist and Marxist ideas, and so I became opposed to them. It's partly why I came to the U.S. If I had stayed in Nicaragua, I would have become a Sandinista.
Did you know anything about the political side of the whole affair?
Not at the time.
When did you learn about it?
When I was already in the United States and became more aware of what was going on.
How did you learn about it?
I learned about it in the news and on television.
Were you directly affected by what was happening in Nicaragua? How?
Yeah, I was, because I still had relatives over there. I wanted those relatives to have a better life without communism.
¡Patria libre! ¡Patria libre! ¡Patria o muerte! ¡Venceremos!
Adelante, marchemos compañeros, avancemos a la revolución. Nuestro pueblo es el dueño de su historia, arquitecto de su liberación, combatientes del frente sandinista. Adelante, que es nuestro el porvenir. Roja y negra bandera nos cobija, patria libre, vencer o morir. Los hijos de Sandino ni se venden ni se rinden. Luchamos contra el yanque, enemigo de la humanidad. Adelante, marchemos compañeros, avancemos a la revolución. Nuestro pueblo es el dueño de su historia, arquitecto de su liberación, combatientes del frente sandinista. Adelante, que es nuestro el porvenir. Roja y negra bandera nos cobija, patria libre, vencer o morir. Hoy llega amanecer, dejó de ser una tentación. Mañana algún día surgirá un nuevo sol y habrá de iluminar toda la tierra que nos dejaron los mártires y héroes con caudalosos ríos de leche.